After the divorce, I was homeless until a stranger asked, "Are you Michael? You just inherited $47 million." I was sitting on the sidewalk, trying to protect myself from the cold wind with an old newspaper. The man's voice was calm and professional. He wore an expensive suit which seemed out of place in that dirty part of town. I thought it was a bad joke. My life had become a mess. My ex-wife, Sandra, kept the house, the car, and almost all my money. I only had the clothes on my back and a backpack with a few mementos. I was on the sidewalk with nothing until the $47 million inheritance came along. If this turnaround affected you, subscribe and leave your like to follow my despair and hope. The man introduced himself as Ricardo, a lawyer. He said he represented the will of a distant relative named Alberto. I barely remembered him, a great uncle I'd seen a few times in my childhood. Ricardo took me for a hot coffee and patiently explained everything to me. The amount was so large that it seemed like a made-up number, 47 million. As I ate hot soup, my first decent meal in weeks, his words echoed in my head. I couldn't believe it. Life had taken everything from me, and suddenly it was giving me a treasure. The next day at Ricardo's office, I signed the documents. The money was real, but along with the fortune there was a dark wooden box. Inside it was an old diary and a letter. The letter was from my uncle Alberto, written a few weeks before his death. He asked me to read the diary before spending any part of the inheritance. That night, in a clean and comfortable hotel room, I began to read. The story I discovered was darker than anything I could have imagined. The diary told how Alberto and his brother, Carlos, started a business together many years ago. They were young and full of dreams, but Carlos was dangerously ambitious. He betrayed his own brother. He forged documents, stole Alberto's ideas, and kicked him out of the company with nothing. Carlos built an empire on his brother's ruin. Alberto had to start over from scratch, his heart broken by the betrayal. He worked hard for decades in silence and built a new fortune, even greater than the first, but he never forgot what Carlos did. He never forgave him. Carlos was my other uncle, the brother who lived a life of luxury and respect, built on a lie. In the letter, Alberto was clear. The money was not a gift, it was a tool. He wrote, "I didn't have the strength to take revenge, but justice must be done. Use this money to show Carlos and his family what it means to lose everything. Make them feel the same pain I felt." Those words burned into me like fire. My own pain, my own sense of failure after the divorce, all mixed with Alberto's anger. At that moment, I was no longer the homeless, lost Michael. I had a purpose. My uncle's revenge would be my revenge. I spent the next few weeks completely transforming myself. I used a small portion of the money to rent a nice apartment, buy new clothes, and take care of my appearance. I hired people to investigate the lives of Carlos and his family. He had a wife, Antonia, who was obsessed with social status, and two children, Rafael and Julia. Each of them had a weak spot, a crack in their perfect life. Rafael was a reckless investor, always looking for the next big deal to impress his father. Julia saw herself as a great artist, but she had no talent, only her family's money to promote her work. My plan began to take shape, piece by piece. It was a game of patience. I wasn't going to simply destroy their finances. I wanted to dismantle the world they had built, the image of perfection they showed everyone. Humiliation would be the main part of my revenge. For them, appearances were everything, and I was going to rip off that mask in front of everyone. I created a new identity, that of a mysterious and successful investor from another country. No one in town knew me, which gave me a huge advantage. The first target was Rafael. I created a front company with an impressive name and a professional website. I started spreading rumors about a new technology that would change the market. I attracted other smaller investors to give credibility to the business. Rafael, eager to prove his worth, took the bait. He came to me, wanting to get in on the investment. I welcomed him to my rented office, a luxurious place overlooking the city. I pretended to be reluctant, saying it was a high-risk business. That only increased his desire. He invested a huge amount, not only his own money but also a significant portion of the family business's money, which he took without Carlos's permission. I waited for the right moment. I let the value of the fake shares rise for a few weeks, feeding his greed. Then, overnight, the company disappeared. The website went offline, the phones were disconnected, the money was gone. Rafael not only lost his fortune, he put the family business in a very difficult position. He was ruined and desperate. While Rafael panicked, I turned to Julia. I created a fake arts foundation with a respected name. I announced a big prize for new artists, with a gala exhibition for the winner. Through my contacts, I made sure the invitation reached Julia. Desperate for recognition, she signed up immediately. Obviously, she was the winner. Antonia, her mother, was overjoyed. She organized a huge party for the night of the exhibition, inviting all the city's elite. It was a chance to show off her daughter's talent. The night of the exhibition was a spectacle. The hall was full of important people, art critics, and journalists, whom I myself had paid to be there. Julia's paintings were prominently displayed, professionally lit. At the height of the party, I gave a signal. The critics I had hired began to speak one by one. They weren't just negative, they were cruel. They described the works as childish, lacking in technique, a disgrace to art. Their words spread through the hall like poison. People began to laugh quietly. Julia turned pale, and Antonia looked like she was about to faint. The humiliation was public and complete. With his children destroyed, the final blow to Carlos was missing. I had saved the best part for last. The investigators I hired found copies of the original documents that Carlos had forged to steal from my uncle Alberto. They were hidden in an old city archive. I anonymously handed everything over to the largest newspaper in the region. The story was published on the front page. Successful businessman built empire by defrauding his own brother. The scandal was huge. His business partners abandoned him. The banks called in their debts. The company, already weakened by Rafael's mistake, collapsed in a matter of days. The family lost everything: their money, their reputation, their friends. They were now the outcasts of the city. A week later, I received a phone call. It was Carlos. He asked me to meet him in a public park. His voice was weak, unrecognizable. I went. He looked like an old, tired man, 20 years older than he really was. He sat down on the bench next to me and confessed everything. He told me how his envy of Alberto's talent had consumed him and led him to commit that terrible act. He cried, a dry, hopeless cry. I expected to feel a wave of satisfaction, of victory, but all I felt was an immense emptiness. Looking at that broken man brought me no joy. Revenge was complete, but my uncle's pain remained in the past, and my own pain had not disappeared. I had destroyed a family, but I had built nothing in its place. That feeling was bitter. I saw in Carlos's eyes the same despair I had felt when I was on the street. I realized that the cycle of pain did not end there. I got up and left without saying a word. That night, I made a decision. I sold the luxurious apartment, closed the shell companies, and went back to living simply. I took the millions that were left and created a real foundation in Alberto's name. A foundation to help young entrepreneurs who had been betrayed or who had lost everything, giving them a second chance. Justice, I understood, was not about destroying those who had hurt us. It was about building something good out of pain. Revenge did not heal my uncle, nor did it heal me. But using his inheritance to create hope finally brought me some peace. The first few months at the foundation were a blur of hard work and a good kind of tiredness that I hadn't felt in years. The place wasn't fancy. I rented a simple space in the city center with white walls, wooden tables, and lots of plants. I called it the Alberto Foundation, a name that felt right and honest. In the beginning, I did everything myself. I reviewed requests for help, talked to people, and tried to understand their stories. They were tales of betrayal, bad luck, dreams shattered by dishonest partners, or unexpected crises. Each story echoed my uncle's pain and my own. The first person I helped was a young man named Daniel. He had a small electronics repair shop and was cheated by his partner, who ran off with all the business's money. He reminded me of Alberto, young and full of hope before he was betrayed by Carlos. I helped Daniel rebuild his business, not only with money but with advice and support. Seeing him reopen the doors of his shop with a smile of relief on his face gave me a satisfaction that revenge never gave me. It was a quiet and real joy, like the first cup of hot coffee after a cold night. Little by little, the foundation grew. I hired a small team, and we started helping more people. I was building something. Every business saved, every person given a second chance was a brick in a wall against the emptiness I felt. One rainy afternoon, as I was organizing some papers, the foundation's door opened. It was Sandra, my ex-wife. She looked older, fatigue marking her face in a way that time alone would not. The clothes she wore, though still of good quality, were a little worn. She looked at me with a mixture of shame and hope. My heart didn't race with anger, as I imagined it would. I felt only a strange calm, as if I were looking at a person from a distant past, from another life. She told me that things hadn't gone well. The money she got in the divorce had run out faster than she thought. She lost her house and was living in a small rented apartment working at a job she hated. She had heard about my change in fortune. News traveled fast in town. She started crying, saying she regretted it, that she had made a terrible mistake. The words seemed rehearsed, but the pain in her eyes seemed real. She asked me for help, for a sum of money to start over. The old Michael would have laughed in her face. He would have taken pleasure in seeing her humiliated, just as I had been. But I was no longer that man. I looked at her and saw only a lost person who had made bad choices and was now facing the consequences. I took a checkbook and wrote an amount. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for her to pay her debts and have a few months of peace to find a way forward. I handed it to her and said in a firm voice but without anger, "This is for you to start over, Sandra. This is the last time we'll see each other. I hope you find peace as I am trying to find mine." She took the check, whispered a thank you, and left without looking back. When the door closed, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved. I had finally closed that chapter of my life, not with revenge, but with a period. Weeks passed and life returned to its new routine. On a sunny Saturday, I went to a local craft fair that the foundation was supporting. I liked to see the results of our work up close. As I walked among the stalls, I saw a familiar face. It was Julia. She was behind a simple table selling small watercolors. They were delicate, simple landscapes, but with an honesty that her former pretentious works never had. She didn't see me. She was focused, talking to a customer, explaining her work with a shy smile. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a t-shirt. There was no sign of the arrogant heiress I had destroyed. In her place was a young woman who seemed for the first time to be doing something for herself. I paused for a moment, watching from afar. Part of me expected to feel proud of my achievement, of having forced her to find a real path. But what I felt was more complex. I felt a pang of remorse for the cruelty of my method. Could I have achieved the same result in another way? Perhaps not, but the question remained unanswered. She sold a small painting to a lady, and her face lit up with genuine joy. It was the kind of joy that money cannot buy. I turned and left before she could see me. That day, I understood that their downfall was not the end of the story. It was, for them too, a chance for a new beginning. My uncle's justice had not been only about destruction, but about forcing a reconstruction based on truth. The following month, I received a call from Ricardo, the lawyer. He invited me for coffee, saying he had some final documents from Alberto's estate for me to sign. We met in a quiet place. He handed me the papers, and as I signed, he watched me with a curious look. "You seem different, Michael," he said, more calm. I told him about the foundation, about Daniel, about what I was building. He listened attentively, nodding slowly. When I finished, he opened his briefcase and took out an old envelope. "Alberto left this for me, with instructions to give it to you a year after you received the inheritance if he felt you were on the right track." My hands trembled a little as I took the envelope. Inside was another letter from Alberto. The handwriting was the same as in the diary, but the words were different. He didn't talk about revenge. He talked about the weight of the hatred he had carried throughout his life. He wrote, "My nephew, if you are reading this, it means that revenge has not consumed you. Anger is a poison we drink hoping the other person will die. For many years I drank that poison. My biggest regret was not losing my business, but losing decades of my life to bitterness. I hope you use what I left you to build something that anger cannot touch. The greatest legacy is not what we destroy, but what we create from our ruins." Alberto's words were like permission for me to forgive myself for the anger I felt, for the acts I committed. He didn't want an avenger, he wanted an heir, someone who could take his pain and turn it into something better. Revenge was not the ultimate goal. It was only the first step in clearing the ground so that something new could grow. I left the cafe feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Alberto's ghost was no longer watching me, waiting for me to fulfill his dark mission. He was at peace, and now I could be too. That afternoon I drove to the cemetery. Alberto's grave was simple, just as he had been in life. I stood there, no longer as the executor of a will, but as a grateful nephew. "I understand, Uncle Alberto," I whispered to the wind. "I understand. Revenge had given me a purpose when I had nothing, but building gave me a life. I had used Alberto's money to destroy Carlos's empire of lies, but I used his lesson to build a legacy of hope. And that, I finally realized, was the only justice that mattered. The peace I felt there under the blue sky was more valuable than all the millions in the world. I was finally home. The years that followed were like a river finally finding its bed. The turmoil of revenge gave way to a calm and steady current. The Alberto Foundation grew, not in size, but in reputation. We helped dozens of people get back on their feet. Each success story was a small light that dispelled the shadows of my past. I no longer needed luxury. I lived in a simple apartment near work, and my greatest joy was seeing the relief on the face of someone who was given a new chance. I had a small, dedicated team. My main assistant was a woman named Clara. She was intelligent, organized, and had a huge heart. Clara understood the Foundation's mission better than anyone. She was the anchor that kept our ship steady. I had found a purpose that didn't consume me, but nourished me. The peace I felt was no longer a novelty, it was the ground beneath my feet. I had learned to live with my memories, both good and bad, without letting them control me. Revenge had been a fire. The Foundation was the garden I planted on the ashes. On a gray Tuesday, I was reviewing some projects when Clara walked into my office. Her expression was different, a mixture of hesitation and concern. "Michael, there's a man outside who would like to talk to you," she said quietly. "He didn't make an appointment, but he insists it's important. He seems desperate." I was used to desperate people. It was the nature of our work. "Send him in, Clara," I replied, without taking my eyes off the papers. I heard the door open and close. Slow footsteps approached my desk. When I looked up, my heart stopped for a second. The man standing in front of me was thin, with deep dark circles under his eyes and worn clothes, but I recognized him immediately. His hair was the same, as was the structure of his face. It was Rafael, Carlos's son. The first domino I knocked over, he looked like he had aged 10 years. The arrogance he wore like armor was gone. In its place was only exhaustion and shame. He stood silently for a long moment, just staring at me. I didn't say anything either. A whirlwind of emotions hit me. The old anger, the contempt, the ghost of satisfaction I felt when I destroyed him. It all came back with a force that surprised me. I felt my body stiffen. The calm I had built up over the years suddenly seemed like a thin layer of ice on a stormy sea. "What do you want here?" I asked, and my voice came out harsher than I intended. He shrank back a little. I heard about this place, he stammered. About what you do. You help people who lost everything because of bad business deals. People who were cheated. The irony was so thick it almost made me laugh. He was describing himself, but he was also describing my Uncle Alberto, and in a way myself, before all else. So, I said coldly, I need help, he confessed, and his eyes filled with tears. I tried to start over. I swear I tried, but I was deceived again. I lost what little I had. My father, he's not well. I'm all he has. At that moment, the old Michael, the Avenger, wanted to send him away. He wanted to say that he was getting exactly what he deserved, that this was Alberto's justice finally complete. I told him to sit down and left the room, saying I needed a minute. I went to the small kitchen in the back and splashed cold water on my face. My mind was a battlefield. Part of me screamed that helping him would be a betrayal of Alberto's memory. The other part, a calmer and more recent voice, reminded me of the second letter. It reminded me of what I had learned. Clara found me there, with a glass of water in my hand. I know who he is, she said softly. The news about that family spread throughout the city years ago. It's him, isn't it? I just nodded, unable to speak. Michael, she continued, looking into my eyes. What is the mission of this foundation? Isn't it to give a second chance without judgment? Her words were simple, but they hit me like a rock. She was right. If I denied Raphael help because of who he was, I would be turning the Alberto Foundation into a continuation of my personal revenge. And I couldn't allow that. That would be my final defeat. It would prove that Alberto's bitterness had ultimately defeated me. I took a deep breath, feeling the ice inside me begin to break. I didn't have to like him. I didn't have to forgive him. I just had to be true to the principles I had created for myself. I returned to my office. Raphael was still there, sitting in the chair, staring at his hands. He looked smaller than I remembered. Tell me your story, I said, and my voice was calm now. From the beginning, he told me everything. He talked about the humiliation, the loss, the disintegration of his family. He told me how his mother, Antonia, couldn't stand the poverty and left, how Julia lived her own life and rarely visited them. He told me about his father, Carlos, a man broken by guilt and failure, who spent his days in silence, staring at the wall. Raphael had taken on the responsibility. He worked in menial jobs, saved up some money, and tried to start a small delivery business with an acquaintance. That acquaintance ran off with the vehicle and all the investment. The story was painfully familiar. It was Daniel's story. It was the story of dozens of other people I had helped. It was my uncle's story. As he spoke, I stopped seeing my enemy's son. I saw only a lost man, paying for his father's mistakes and his own, trapped in a cycle of bad luck and bad choices. When he finished, silence filled the room. I picked up a form, the same one I gave to everyone who came to the foundation. Fill this out, I said. We'll review your case as we do with everyone else. If your business plan is solid, we'll help you. He looked at me incredulous. You really will? The mission of the Alberto Foundation is to help entrepreneurs who have been betrayed to start over, I said, repeating the words that were written on our entrance wall. You fit that description. He couldn't thank me. He just cried, a silent, tired cry. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't a weight of anger, but the weight of a judgment I still carried without realizing it. By deciding to help Raphael, I wasn't forgiving Carlos. I was freeing myself from the last remnant of that hatred. I was proving to myself, and to Alberto's ghost, that I had really changed. True justice was not the balance of pain, but the breaking of the cycle of pain. In the following months, the foundation supported Raphael. It wasn't easy. He was proud and distrustful at first, but little by little, he understood that the help was genuine. We gave him not only the capital to buy a new vehicle, but also mentoring to manage his small business. I assigned one of my best consultants to accompany him. I kept my distance myself, so he wouldn't feel constantly judged by me. A year later, Clara showed me a progress report. Raphael's small delivery company was stable. He had secured 2 fixed contracts and was even thinking of hiring an assistant. He was paying back the foundation's loan on time, without ever missing a payment. That Saturday, curiosity got the better of me. I drove to his company's address, a small warehouse in an industrial area of the city. I stayed in the car across the street watching. I saw Raphael coming out, clipboard in hand, giving instructions to a driver. He wasn't smiling, but his face had an expression of concentration and purpose. He looked like a man who had found his place. Then the door of the small office opened and Carlos came out. He was older, more stooped, but he swept the sidewalk with a calmness I had never seen in him before. He no longer looked like a fallen emperor, just an elderly gentleman helping his son. They exchanged a few words, and for a moment I saw Raphael put his hand on his father's shoulder, a simple gesture of support. At that moment I understood the whole truth. Revenge had destroyed an empire of lies, but compassion was building something small, real, and honest in its place. I had used Alberto's money to fulfill his first wish, and now I had used his legacy to fulfill his last. I started the car and drove away. The sky was clear, and for the first time, I felt that the story of Alberto, Carlos, and me had finally come to an end, and it was a peaceful ending. Life went on. The peace I found was not like a prize you win, but like a garden you tend to every day. Clara and I became an inseparable team. She was no longer just my assistant. She was my confidant, my best friend. We spent our days working side by side at the foundation, and many nights we had dinner together at a small restaurant near the office. We talked about everything except my past. She never asked, and I was grateful for that. She knew the general story, the whole town did, but she respected my silence about the details. With Clara, I was neither the avenger nor the philanthropist. I was just Michael, and that was a huge relief. The work at the foundation gave me a purpose, but it was Clara's calm and constant presence that reminded me that I deserved to have a normal life. Gradually, I realized that my feelings for her went beyond friendship. The way she smiled when one of our projects was successful, the way her forehead wrinkled in concentration as she read a proposal. Every little detail about her filled the void that existed within me, but fear held me back. Fear that the shadow of my past was too big for any new light to enter. One night, we were closing the office. Outside, the city sparkled with the lights of the buildings. Clara was putting away some documents when she showed me a page from a local newspaper. "Look at this, Michael," she said, with a neutral expression. The article was about a charity art auction that would take place the following week. The featured artist, whose works would be sold to raise funds for a children's hospital, was Julia. Her photo was there. The face was the same, but the expression was completely different. There was no arrogance, just a confident serenity. The article described her as one of the most promising new voices in contemporary art, praising the honesty and simplicity of her work. My stomach churned. It was like seeing a ghost I had created myself. I closed the newspaper. "Interesting," I muttered, trying to sound indifferent, but Clara knew me too well. "You should go," she said softly. I stared at her, surprised. "Go? Why? That part of my life is over." "Is it really over?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Michael, you built all this to create second chances. You saw Raphael start over. Maybe you need to see that too, not for her, for yourself, to close the last door." Clara's words stayed with me all week. I didn't want to go. The idea of entering that world again, the world of the elite that I had invaded and destroyed, gave me the chills. But she was right. Part of me still felt like Alberto's avenger. I needed to free myself from that role forever. I needed to see with my own eyes that their lives hadn't simply ended, but had been transformed. On the night of the auction, I put on a simple suit. It wasn't the luxurious armor I had worn to deceive Raphael. It was just an outfit. Clara offered to go with me, and her presence by my side gave me the strength I needed. The venue was a modern art gallery, a large space with white walls and lights focused on the paintings. It was crowded, but the atmosphere was different from Antonia's parties. It was quieter, more respectful, and there in the center of it all was Julia. She talked to people, explaining her work with a calm and genuine passion. There was no longer a desperate need for approval. She simply loved what she did, and the paintings, they were beautiful. They were urban landscapes, scenes from everyday life, filled with a gentle melancholy, but also with hope. They were the work of someone who had seen the beauty in simple things after losing superficial luxury. We stood in a corner watching from afar. At one point, I saw Antonia arrive, Carlos's ex-wife. She was different too. She wore an elegant but discreet dress. She was no longer the center of attention. She approached Julia and hugged her. It was a quick, almost shy hug, but full of quiet pride. Antonia didn't stay to socialize. She just kissed her daughter on the forehead and left. In that gesture, I saw a whole story. The story of a mother who had perhaps learned to love her daughter for who she was, and not for the status she could provide. The auction began. Julia's paintings were sold one by one, for high prices. People weren't buying out of charity or for status. They were buying because the art was good. When the last painting was announced, a small canvas showing an empty park bench in the rain, I felt an impulse. It was an image of loneliness, but also of peace. I discreetly raised my paddle and made a bid, and another. I ended up buying the painting without anyone, not even Julia, realizing who the buyer was. I paid through a gallery assistant and asked for it to be delivered to the foundation without my name, just the name of the institution. It wasn't a trophy for my victory. It was a silent acknowledgement of her journey, an end point. When we left the gallery, the night was cold and clear. We walked in silence for a while. "How do you feel?" Clara asked. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. "Light," I replied, and it was the absolute truth. "I feel like I've just put down a very heavy suitcase, a suitcase I didn't even know I was still carrying." We stopped in front of her building. The streetlights illuminated her face, and I saw the worry in her eyes give way to a smile of relief. In that moment, the fear that had held me back melted away. The past was no longer a frightening shadow. It was just a story, a part of me, but it wasn't all that I was. Clara, I began, my voice a little shaky. I've spent the last few years building things for others. Second chances, new beginnings. I think it's time I started building something for myself. She looked at me, waiting. I don't know how to do that alone, I confessed. And the truth is, I don't want to. I held her hand. It was warm, despite the cold night. I'm in love with you, Clara, and I know it's complicated because of everything, but I needed you to know. She didn't answer right away. She just squeezed my hand. Then she took a step forward and kissed me. It was a soft kiss, without drama, without urgency. It was a kiss that felt like a safe haven, a kiss that said, welcome home. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. It's not complicated at all, Michael, she whispered. It's the simplest thing in the world. That night, when I returned to my apartment, Julia's painting still hadn't arrived, but I didn't need it. The image I would keep forever was not that of the empty park bench, but of Clara's face, smiling at me under the city lights. My uncle's revenge had given me a purpose when I was a man who had nothing. The foundation gave me a mission when I was a rich and empty man. But Clara's love gave me what I never knew I was looking for, a future that wasn't about fixing the past, but about living in the present. I finally understood Alberto's true legacy. It wasn't the money, nor the call for revenge, nor even the second letter. The true legacy was the lesson that even from the worst ruins, something beautiful and strong can be built. And for the first time in many, many years, I was no longer building for others or for someone's memory. I was building for us, and I was finally home. Our love was a simple thing, built day by day. There were no grand gestures, just the certainty of having someone by my side. Mornings began with coffee and the soft sound of newspaper pages. Evenings ended with quiet conversations about the foundation's cases or some movie we saw on television. Clara had a gift for turning the ordinary into something special. Her presence was my peace. The foundation continued its work, quietly and efficiently. Each life we helped rebuild was another brick in the wall that separated me from my dark past. I no longer thought about Carlos, Rafael, or Julia. They were characters in a book I had read long ago, a story that no longer belonged to me. Alberto's money, which once seemed like a mountain of gold, was now just a tool to build, not to destroy. I lived modestly, and my greatest wealth was coming home to find Clara waiting for me with a smile. On weekends, we used to drive out of town close to the sea. We would walk on the sand, feeling the wind without the need to talk much. It was in those moments that I felt life truly pulsing, far from the shadows and ghosts. I was just Michael, a man who loved a woman and had found his place in the world. About a year after our first kiss, life seemed to have settled down for good. We were thinking about getting married. Nothing big, just a simple ceremony for us and a few close friends. It was on a Thursday afternoon that the past knocked on my door, not with a bang, but with the discreet sound of an envelope being slid under the door of my apartment. I picked it up, thinking it was a bill or advertising, but the envelope was of high quality, and my name was written by hand in elegant, familiar handwriting. My heart froze before I even opened it. It was Sandra's handwriting, my ex-wife, the woman who left me penniless on the street. I opened the letter with trembling fingers. The words were polite, cold, and to the point. She had heard about my sudden luck and my charity work. She said she was going through difficulties and would like to talk. It wasn't an apology. It was a summons, an address. A date and a time were written at the bottom. A cafe in the city center. For a moment, the old Michael returned. Anger rose in my throat, hot as poison. I crumpled the paper, wanting to tear it into 1,000 pieces and throw it in the trash, along with the memory of her. But the image of Clara came to my mind, the piece I had built with so much effort. I took a deep breath, smoothed out the paper, and put it in my pocket. I couldn't let that ghost come back to haunt me. I needed to face it one last time. That night, I told Clara everything. I showed her the letter. She read it silently, her expression calm as always. I expected her to be angry with me, to tell me to ignore it, not to give Sandra the satisfaction of a response. But Clara was wiser than me. What are you going to do? She asked simply. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to go there and throw everything she did to me in her face. The other part just wants to forget she exists. Clara held my hand. You're not that man anymore, Michael. The one who needs to shout to be heard. The one who needs revenge to feel strong. Her words calmed me down. You don't have to go for her. If you go for yourself, to close that door once and for all so she has no more power over you. She was right. Ignoring the letter would be an act of fear. Going in anger would be giving her the victory. I needed to go with the calmness I had learned to cultivate. I needed to go as the man I was now, not as the man she had left behind. My Uncle Alberto's letter and the diary revealed dark secrets about my Uncle Carlos. What do you think happened to them? Comment on your theory and share my story. On the appointed day, I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. I chose a table in the corner from where I could see the entrance. Sandra arrived punctually. She had aged. There were worry lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. The expensive clothes she wore looked a little worn, like a costume that no longer fit properly. She saw me and walked over to the table with the same arrogant confidence as always, but her eyes told me something else. They showed a hint of desperation. "Michael," she said, sitting down. "You came. What do you want, Sandra?" I asked bluntly. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you did well. I'm happy for you." The lie was so obvious it was sad. She began to tell a long story about bad investments, about a new partner who had cheated her, about debts that were piling up. It was a story similar to that of so many people I helped at the foundation. The irony was cruel. She, who had never cared about anyone but herself, was now in the same situation as those she had always despised. She wanted money, a large sum to start over. She spoke as if it were her right, as if I owed her a share of my good fortune. As she spoke, I felt no anger. I felt a cold, distant pity. I saw a woman who had based her entire life on superficial things, money, status, appearances, and who, having lost all of that, had nothing left. She had no real friends, no purpose, no peace. She was empty. When she finished her speech, she stared at me, waiting. "I'm not going to give you money, Sandra," I said, my voice calm and firm. Her expression changed. The mask of sympathy fell away, revealing the anger and contempt that had always been there. "After all I've done for you? I gave you the best years of my life," she spat. "You left me on the street," I replied, without changing my tone. "You took everything and didn't look back. There's nothing you can say that will make me feel like I owe you anything." She was about to protest, but I interrupted her. I took a card from the Alberto Foundation out of my pocket and placed it on the table. "But I'm not you," I continued. "If you need help to start over, to set up a business, to get back on your feet, this is the place. You'll be treated like anyone else. You'll have to present a plan, prove you're serious. You won't get any special treatment. Help is available, but you'll have to work for it. There will be no easy money." Sandra looked at the card as if it were trash. The idea of having to ask for help, of having to humiliate herself and follow rules, was an insult to her. She stood up abruptly, her face red with rage. "I don't need your charity," she said, her voice shrill. She turned and left the cafe, stomping her feet. I stood there, staring at the empty chair. I felt no satisfaction. I felt no victory. I felt only relief. The last ghost was gone. I paid for the 2 coffees and went out into the street. The afternoon sun warmed my face. I felt light. By offering her the same help I offered everyone else, I wasn't being generous to her. I was being true to myself, to the principles that now guided me. I had broken the cycle. Revenge no longer controlled me. Bitterness no longer had a place in me. That night, when I got home, Clara was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The smell of food filled the air. She looked at me, a question mark in her eyes. "It's over," I said, and hugged her tightly. She hugged me back, understanding everything without me having to say anything else. In that hug, I knew I was truly home. The past was just a story, and the future was a blank page that we would write together. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to turn the page. The peace I felt was no longer something I sought. It was the air I breathed. The months that followed were the calm after the storm. Clara and I built our routine on small, safe things. Our wedding plans were proof of that. We didn't want a big party, just a simple gathering with the few people who really mattered. We spent our evenings looking at catalogs of small, charming places outside the city. We discussed flowers and food with a lightness I never thought I would have in my life. The foundation was growing, and with it, my sense of purpose. I was no longer a man driven by the shadow of revenge. I was a man who had found light in helping others out of their own shadows. The past, with Carlos, Rafael, and even Sandra, seemed like an old movie seen on a distant night. The memories no longer hurt. They were just scars, proof that I had survived something and become stronger. Clara was the center of this new world. She had an incredible ability to keep me grounded. When I lost myself in worries about the future of the foundation or some difficult case, she would simply hold my hand and say, "One step at a time, Michael. You've already climbed the hardest mountain. The rest is just a walk." And she was right. Peace was my new reality, a reality that I protected with all my strength because I knew how fragile it could be. I had learned that happiness was not the absence of problems, but the ability to face them without letting them destroy you inside. And with Clara by my side, I felt indestructible. The tranquility was shattered one Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving the foundation's office when a man approached me on the sidewalk. He was young, well-dressed, and had a serious, penetrating gaze. "Michael?" he asked. His voice was calm but firm. I nodded, expecting another request for help or a partnership proposal. "My name is Daniel. I'm Sandra's brother." My stomach churned. Her name, which I had buried so deeply, came back with unexpected force. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I tried to stay calm and straighten my posture. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. Daniel was unfazed. "I don't want your money, if that's what you're thinking. I want to talk about justice." The word justice sounded like a bad joke. He invited me to a nearby cafe, and something told me that ignoring him would be a mistake. We sat at a table in the back. He got straight to the point. "I know what you did to my sister," he began. "She told me everything. How you humiliated her, offering your charity as if she were just anyone." I interrupted him. "Your sister left me with nothing. She took every penny and disappeared. What did she expect?" Daniel gave a cold smile. She expected you to be the man she met, not this saint you pretend to be. What did you build this empire of kindness on, Michael? On revenge? You destroyed people to get where you are. Carlos, Julia, do you think no one knows? My blood ran cold. He knew. He wasn't just defending his sister. He was attacking me for what I had become. You sell yourself as a savior, Daniel continued, his voice low and full of contempt. You help the needy, rebuild lives. But what about the lives you broke along the way? Do you think you can just erase that part of your history? Do you think your uncle's money washes the blood from your hands? Every word was a blow. He wasn't wrong. The source of my fortune was dirty. The foundation's base was built on the ruin of others. I had made peace with that, but hearing someone else throw it in my face was different. What are you getting at, Daniel? I asked, my voice tired. I want everyone to know who you really are, he said. I'm going to tell your story to the newspapers. The whole story. The man who used an inheritance for family revenge and then hid behind a facade of charity. Let's see how many people want your foundation's help after that. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Blackmail. He wanted to destroy my reputation, years of work, the peace I had achieved. The old Michael would have gone after him, would have used money and power to silence him, but I was no longer that man. I returned home feeling a familiar weight on my shoulders, the baggage I thought I had left behind. Clara immediately sensed that something was wrong. I didn't hide anything. I told her about my meeting with Daniel, about his accusations and his threat. She listened carefully without interrupting me. When I finished, silence filled the room. I expected to see fear in her eyes or perhaps disappointment, but what I saw was determination. He's not lying, is he? She asked softly. No, I admitted. Not about revenge. That's how it all started. Clara stood up and came over to me. She put her hands on my face, forcing me to look at her. Then he has no power over you, Michael. The truth can only hurt you if you're trying to hide it. Her words were like a light in a dark room. I was afraid because part of me still lived in the shadow of that past. I had closed the door, but I hadn't locked it. Daniel was just threatening to open it. You've spent all this time building things for others, she continued. The foundation, new opportunities, but you still hadn't rebuilt your own story. You just buried it. Maybe it's time to do that, to tell your own story. The idea was scary, exposing my worst actions to the world, risking everything I had built. But at the same time, it was liberating. It was the only way to take the power out of Daniel's hands. It was the only way to be truly free. The following week, I made my decision. I sought out a journalist known for his long, detailed reports, a man who wasn't looking for scandals, but rather the truth behind the stories. I invited him to the foundation and told him everything. From the day Sandra left me, to the letter from my uncle Alberto, to the plan for revenge against Carlos and Rafael, to Julia's downfall, and how that path of destruction paradoxically led me to want to build something good. I didn't hold back. I admitted my anger, my desire for revenge, the methods I used. I spoke of my darkness without fear, and then I talked about the change, about how helping the first person transformed me. I talked about Clara and about the man I was striving to be every day. When the article was published, the impact was immediate. There was a media uproar, just as Daniel had predicted. The words revenge and fortune were splashed across the headlines. For a few days, the foundation's phone didn't stop ringing. Some donors suspended their contributions. I was judged, criticized, and called a hypocrite. It was a difficult time. I prepared myself for the worst, to see everything fall apart. But then something unexpected happened. The stories of the people the foundation had helped began to emerge. Small business owners, families who had regained their homes, young people who had gotten an education. They went to the press to defend our work. They didn't care about my past. They cared about the present I had helped them build. Slowly, the tide turned. The narrative shifted from being about my revenge to being about my redemption. Donations not only returned, they increased. People saw a story not of a saint, but of a flawed man who tried to fix his mistakes as best he could. My brutal honesty had disarmed me, but it had also humanized me. Daniel disappeared. His weapon was secrecy, and I had disarmed him by turning on the light. He no longer had power over me. The door to the past was no longer just closed. It was wide open, and there was nothing scary inside anymore. It was just my story, with all its ugly and beautiful parts. One Saturday night, a few weeks later, Clara and I were sitting on the balcony of our apartment, looking at the city lights. The air was calm. The noise of the storm had passed. How do you feel? She asked, repeating the same question she had asked me on the night of the auction. I smiled. Free, I replied. For real this time. I held her hand. Thank you, Clara, for showing me that true strength isn't in hiding our scars, but in not being ashamed of them. She rested her head on my shoulder. We're getting married next month, she said, changing the subject with the simplicity I loved so much. Yes, we are, I confirmed. Looking at the horizon, I understood that my future would not be built despite my past, but because of it. Every mistake, every pain, every step in the darkness had led me there, to that moment of peace, alongside the woman I loved. I was finally no longer running away or fixing things. I was just living, and I was finally home. Time passed, bringing with it a peace I never imagined possible. Our wedding was exactly as we wanted it to be, simple and meaningful. unforgettable. It took place in a rented garden in the late afternoon, with the sun painting the sky orange. There were only a handful of friends and the foundation's board of directors. Clara looked beautiful in a simple dress, and her smile was the only decoration that mattered. When we exchanged vows, my voice didn't tremble. I promised her not a future without problems, but a future where we would face anything together. And I knew, with a certainty that warmed my soul, that it was a promise I could keep. Our life together settled into a comfortable routine. Dinners in the kitchen, walks in the park on Sundays, long conversations on the couch. The Alberto Foundation became a pillar in the community. My story, once a weapon against me, became an example that people can change. I was no longer the vengeful heir. I was the man who turned his pain into purpose. The scars were still there, but now they were part of a map that led me home, to Clara, to a life worth living. I thought all the ghosts had been exorcised, that all accounts with the past had been settled. I was wrong. The final bill was about to arrive. It was almost a year after our wedding. I was in a meeting at the foundation, discussing a new housing project for low-income families, when my assistant entered the room with a worried expression. "Michael, there's a young man outside. He insists on speaking with you." He didn't want to say what it was about, only that his name is Lucas. I apologized to my colleagues and went to the reception area. The young man was standing near the window. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, and wore simple but clean clothes. There was something about him that seemed strangely familiar. When he turned and our eyes met, my heart skipped a painful beat. He had my grandfather's eyes. Eyes I only knew from old photos. Eyes from Carlos's family. "Are you Lucas?" I asked, my voice lower than normal. He confirmed with a nod. "I'm Carlos's grandson, Rafael's son." The names fell like stones in the silence of the room. Rafael, my father's accomplice, the man whose career I helped destroy. The calm I had built with so much effort began to crack. I took him to my office, a place I saw as a sanctuary of second chances. Now it felt like a courtroom. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I expected anger, accusations, maybe even a threat like Daniel's. But Lucas was different. His pain was quiet, deep. "I don't want your money," he said, sitting down in the chair I offered him. "I just want you to listen. You read your great-uncle's diary." I read my grandfather's letters. He took a small bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with a ribbon from a worn briefcase. They were letters Carlos had written to his wife, Antonia, during the years of conflict with Alberto. Lucas began to read excerpts aloud. The story that emerged from those pages was different. It was not the story of a greedy villain, but of a pragmatic man desperately trying to save a business that his brother's idealism was sinking. Carlos described the sleepless nights, the debts that Alberto refused to see, the risks he had to take to keep the company afloat. The final act, the betrayal that Alberto described in his diary, was painted in Carlos's letters as a last-ditch attempt to save what was left, to secure the family's future, including Alberto's share, which he deposited in a separate account that Alberto never touched. "My grandfather was no saint," Lucas said, his voice breaking. He was tough, sometimes ruthless in business, but he loved his brother. He saw Alberto sink into sadness and pride, refusing any help. "The diary you read was written by a broken-hearted man who saw the world through a filter of bitterness. It wasn't the whole truth, it was his truth." Each of Lucas's words was a hammer breaking down the walls of my certainty. That diary had been my Bible, the rock on which I built my revenge and later, my redemption. What if the rock was sand? What if my justice had been based on a lie or worse, on a half-truth? When Lucas left, leaving a copy of the letters on my desk, I was paralyzed. The man who prided himself on bringing the truth to light was now forced to face that his truth might be just another shadow. That night, I told Clara everything. I showed her the letters. She read each one carefully. I expected her to defend my actions, to tell me that I did what I had to do. But Clara, as always, offered me something more valuable: clarity. "Michael, this doesn't change who you've become," she said, holding my hands, "but it may change the meaning of your story. You can't build a real future on a foundation that may be crooked. You need to know the whole story, not for them, but for you." She was right. I spent the next few weeks on a silent search. I hired a private investigator, a discreet and efficient man named Roberto, to find old company records and locate former employees who were still alive. Little by little, the pieces of a much more complex puzzle began to fall into place. We interviewed a former accountant, a man in his late 80s who lived in a nursing home. He remembered the brothers well. "Alberto was the soul of the business," said the old man, "but Carlos was the brain and the muscle. Alberto dreamed, Carlos built. The problem was that in the end, Alberto's dreams were costing too much. The documents Roberto found in public archives confirmed the story. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Carlos's maneuvers, though ethically questionable, were what prevented total ruin. He saved what he could, in the harsh way he knew how. The truth was neither clean nor simple. There was no hero and no villain. There were two brothers, both flawed, who loved and resented each other in equal measure, and who were destroyed by their own natures. Alberto, the proud idealist. Carlos, the ruthless realist. My revenge had not been an act of divine justice. It had been just another tragic chapter in the story of a broken family. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. I felt no guilt, but a deep sadness. A sadness for the pain that had spread across generations, fueled by secrets and partial truths. I made another appointment with Lucas. This time we met at a neutral cafe. I brought with me a folder with the documents Roberto had found. I placed it on the table between us. "You were right," I said, my voice firm but without any coldness. "The story is more complicated than I thought. Your grandfather was not the monster my uncle's diary portrayed, and my uncle was not the saint I imagined." For the first time, I saw a glimmer of relief in Lucas's eyes. He didn't want revenge. He wanted recognition. He wanted his family's memory to be cleansed of the stain of absolute villainy. "What do we do now?" he asked. At that moment, the answer seemed clear to me. The cycle of pain and revenge had to end there, at that coffee table. The Alberto Foundation was built to right a wrong, I explained. Now I see that the mistake was bigger than I thought. It wasn't just about money. It was about the truth of a family. The foundation will change. It will no longer be just the Alberto Foundation. It will be the Alberto and Carlos Memorial Institute. We will fund projects, but we will also preserve history, the complete history, with the flaws and virtues of both sides. Lucas looked at me, his eyes misty. He said nothing, just reached out his hand across the table. I shook it. It wasn't a business handshake. It was a peace treaty, signed by two generations who carried the burden of a war they didn't start. That day, I no longer felt like an avenger or a savior. I just felt like a man who finally understood that the most valuable inheritance was not money, but the chance to break a cycle and begin to heal. When I returned home, I found Clara waiting for me. She didn't need to ask. She saw in my face that the final weight had been lifted. "It's over," I said, repeating the same words I used after confronting Sandra. But this time, the meaning was different. It wasn't the end of a battle. It was the beginning of true peace, built not on victory, but on understanding. The blank page of the future was still there, but now the story that preceded it was complete, with all its beauty and ugliness, and I was ready to write the next chapter, not as the heir to a fortune or revenge, but as the guardian of a hard-won peace. The change in the foundation's name was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a silent earthquake that reorganized the landscape of my life. The Alberto and Carlos Memorial Institute became a place of reconciliation. We funded not only housing and scholarships, but also family conflict mediation projects, helping people find common ground before bitterness took deep root, as it had in my own family. Clara was the soul of the institute, with her empathy and her ability to see the human being behind the problem. I was the practical side, the administrator, the man who learned the hard way that good intentions need a solid plan to keep them from falling apart. We became a team, not only at work, but in life. Our home was our refuge, a place where silence was not empty, but full of peace. We built a small garden in the back, and I discovered a simple pleasure in getting my hands dirty with soil, in seeing something grow and flourish under my care. It was the opposite of everything I had done in the past, which was to destroy. Now I cultivated. Life seemed to have finally found its rhythm, a soft and steady melody. I no longer had nightmares about the diary or the faces of the people I had exposed. The peace I felt was not fragile. It seemed strong, rooted in the complete truth that I finally knew. That peace lasted almost 2 years. It was shattered on a rainy autumn afternoon. I was in the office, reviewing the budgets for the coming year, when Ricardo, my lawyer and now a good friend, called me. His voice, usually calm and controlled, had a tone of urgency that put me on alert. "Michael, I need you to come to my office. Now, it's important." He didn't want to give me any details over the phone. I put on my coat, told Clara I had to go out, and drove through the city in the heavy rain. The raindrops on the windshield seemed to blur the world, and a cold anxiety began to rise up my spine. I had the feeling that the storm outside was a reflection of something that was about to collapse in my life. When I arrived at Ricardo's office, he was waiting for me with a somber expression. "She's back, Michael," he said bluntly, handing me a letter with a letterhead from a law firm I didn't recognize. Sandra. My stomach churned. The name sounded like an echo from a past I thought was buried. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was a formal notification. Sandra was filing a lawsuit against me. The allegation was absurd. She claimed that the divorce had been based on fraud. According to her lawyers, since my revenge was built on the half-truth of Alberto's diary, the fortune I used to destroy her was, in a way, illegitimate. Therefore, she argued that she was entitled to a new division of assets, a share of the inheritance that she called compensation for moral and financial damages. "This is crazy," I said, crumpling the paper in my hand. "She's not entitled to anything. The divorce was finalized years ago." Ricardo sighed, sitting down behind his desk. "Legally, her case is weak, very weak, but that's not what she wants, Michael. She doesn't want to win in court. She wants to drag you through the mud. She knows you've built a new image, a reputation. A lawsuit like this, full of allegations of fraud, will turn into a media circus. She's betting betting you'll pay any amount to make her disappear quietly. The plan was diabolical and typical of Sandra. She wasn't attacking my fortune, but my peace. The same peace I had fought so hard to achieve. The anger I felt was immediate and overwhelming. It was the old anger, the one that consumed me when I was on the streets, hungry and cold. The urge to fight, to crush her with all the power I had, came back with full force. I could hire the best lawyers, expose every lie she told, turn her life into hell, just as she had done to mine. For a moment, the old Michael, the Avenger, was back, ready for war. But then I looked out the window of Ricardo's office. The rain had stopped and a faint ray of sunshine pierced through the clouds. I remembered the garden at home, Clara's hands holding mine, Lucas's voice saying he just wanted recognition. "No," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm not going to play her game." Ricardo looked at me surprised. "What do you mean? We can't just ignore this." "I'm not going to ignore it," I replied, feeling a clarity wash over me. "But I'm not going to war either. That's what she expects. She wants to see me transformed into the monster she believes I am. She wants to pull me back into the pit. I won't." I returned home that night with the weight of the world on my shoulders, but also with a decision. I told Clara everything. She listened quietly, her face calm as always. When I finished, she didn't tell me what to do. She just asked, "Who do you want to be, Michael? The man you were or the man you've become?" Her question was the only compass I needed. The following week, I asked Ricardo to schedule a meeting with Sandra and her lawyers. I would go in person. Clara insisted on coming with me, not to speak, but just to be there. Her presence was my shield. We met in the conference room of her law firm. The place was cold and impersonal. Sandra was there, looking as impeccable as ever, but there was a gleam of greed in her eyes that I knew well. She looked at me with a triumphant smile, believing I was there to surrender. Her lawyer began to speak, listing the absurd demands, talking about millions. I let him finish. Silence fell over the room. All eyes were on me. I took a deep breath and looked directly at Sandra. "You're not getting a penny of the inheritance, Sandra," I said calmly. Her smile faltered. "But I'll give you something. I'll buy your share of our old house. I'll pay you the current market value, a fair price, and I'll give you a lump sum, a reasonable amount, so you can start over, far away from here." Her lawyer began to protest, but I raised my hand. "This is not a negotiation. It's a final offer. You accept it, withdraw the lawsuit today, and we never see each other again. Or you refuse, and we go to court. And I want you to understand one thing. If we go to court, I'm not going to fight to protect my money. I'm going to fight to expose the truth. Every lie, every manipulation. I have infinite resources, Sandra. I'm going to dig up every secret you have, and I won't stop until everyone knows exactly who you are. The choice is yours." My voice wasn't angry. It was coldly certain. I wasn't bluffing, and she knew it. She saw me not as the broken man she had kicked out of the house, nor as the blind avenger who came after. She saw the man I was now, someone who knew the price of war and was willing to pay it, but who preferred peace. She saw that I was no longer afraid of her nor of my past. The greed in her eyes was replaced by cold calculation. She knew that a prolonged battle would destroy her. A quick settlement would give her money and freedom. She looked at the lawyer, who shrugged slightly. "We accept the offer," she said, her voice thin and resentful. We signed the papers right there. As I left the building, holding Clara's hand, I didn't feel the taste of victory. I felt something much better, the relief of closure. The last ghost had been confronted, not with hatred, but with clarity, not with revenge, but with boundaries. As I got into the car, I looked at Clara. "It's over," I said, and for the first time the word sounded complete, definitive. She smiled and rested her head on my shoulder. "Now it is," she said. "Now you are truly home." And as I drove away from that part of my life, I knew she was right. Alberto's inheritance had not only given me money, it had given me a painful journey through the ruins of my family and myself, and at the end of that journey, I did not find treasure, but myself. A man with scars, yes, but finally whole and free. The $47 million fortune came with a grim diary from my uncle Alberto about a deal with his brother. What did you think of this sinister twist and my outcome? Subscribe for more shocking stories like mine.